Jesus of Nazareth a real historical figure or just a myth that grew over time? This is the most debated question in history. Some claim that Jesus exists, but others claim that Jesus doesn't exist at all. So, but in this video, I'm going to explore the evidence both for and against this statement. Does Jesus of Nazareth really exist? Some critics actually say that Jesus never existed at all. And one of the critics is Bertrand Russell. He's a philosopher. In his essay, Why Am I Not a Christian? Argued, historically, it's quite doubtful whether Christ ever existed at all, and if he did, we don't know anything about him. And then another modern mythicist, like historian Richard Carrier, go further. In his book on the historicity of Jesus, Carrier writes that the probability of Jesus existed is very low, perhaps less than 1 in 3. This is actually fun. And like Undecorative and G. Wells argue that the Jesus of the earliest Christian written was more of a mythical than a real person. And then this guy, he actually has a point. And then I'm going to give you 3 points that actually back what he said. I'm going to give you 3 points right now. Actually back what he said. Because if you look at it, the gospel was written decades after Jesus Christ had gone. And it's more of a just of a miracles, resurrection, virgin birth, and which sometimes is actually unexplainable. Yeah, it's very unexplainable. Nobody can prove it. But and another point is Paul letter was focused more on Jesus' death and resurrection than his earthly life. Paul never met Jesus. But why is that this guy does not actually talk about his earthly life? And if you look at it, Paul should have written more earthly life of Jesus, because a lot of people at Judea at that time that will know Jesus, that Paul will gain more account of. But that does not mean that Paul doesn't write about earthly life of Jesus, but he writes more of the those of this myth of resurrection than the historicity of Jesus. And I know Christian reference has been altered by scribes. And if you look at it, like this Josephus written, that many scholars believe it has been altered by the so-called early Christians. And then Josephus quote in his books, he said, about this time, they lived Jesus, a wise man. We didn't want to call him a man, for he was one who performed surprise deeds and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was Christ. And when called upon accusation of the principal among the men, Pilate had condemned him to a cross. Those who had first come to love him did not cease. And if you look at it, in one of the streets, you say Christ. And if you look at Josephus is a Jewish historian, a very devoted Jew, and he was even born into a Jewish royalty. If you look at it, Jews cannot say that Jesus is Christ. But this guy Josephus written in his book, he actually raised a question. According to historian Gibbon in his book, The Decline and Fall of Roman Empire, 1776, Gibbon wrote, the passage of Josephus concerning Jesus is more evidentially corrupt than any other passage of his work. But that does not mean that this written of Josephus does not refer to Jesus. And then another historian, Tacitus, a Roman historian, writes around 116 CE, recording Annas 1544. Christus, the founder of the name, suffered the extreme penalty under Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius. This is important. If you look at it, Titus is Christian, but in writing about Christ is what you can actually say of more evidence. But historians, scholars actually say that this written has been altered by the earliest Christians. And another historian, Clyde de Young, which is a Roman historian, referenced in one of his books, Christians worship Christ as gods. And then these these are something that prove to the existence of Jesus Christ. And then, but there's a shocking evidence about Jesus that I'm going to reveal now. A Syrian writer, which name is Mara Ba Sepharians, compared Jesus to Socrates Pythagorean, asking what advantage the Jews gained from executing their white king. It was after that their kingdom was abolished. This is a surprise evidence that I have got surprise evidence. But can I, in the comment section, what do you think about these Syrian writers? What about his writing? What do you think about it? Is this evidence, or you just find that this guy is just a mere word, maybe that's been put out by Christian? But then we cannot leave all this evidence of Jesus Christ without these early gospels and early Christian source. Christians and early Christians, they wrote a lot about Jesus Christ, especially in the gospel, because that is when Christians claim that the account of Jesus Christ is. So, and then if you look at Paul letters, it was written 20 or 30 years after the death of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. And even in Galatians chapter 1 verse 19, Paul claimed that he met James, the brother of Jesus Christ. So this gospel often reflects some realistic place, some place that we can trace in this life, and the politics, the custom, the geography, which is somehow surprising, accurate, surprising, accurate. But you cannot leave all this evidence without talking about archaeological evidence, because if you want to look at it, most of all this history, most of all this stuff of ancient things that we believe is something that archaeological have seen. That's why we believe most of them. And then you look place like Nazareth, place like pool of Bethsaida that is mentioned in the Bible. This place is something that archaeological have discovered, and then this also give us that maybe Jesus Christ exists. And then, according to historian E.P. Sanders, who is not traditional Christians, summarize it in this way. We can know quite a lot about Jesus, that he was baptized, that he taught, that he was crucified. These are historical facts. In his book, The Historical Figure of Jesus, 1993. Of course, not every details in gospel can be treated as literal history, especially all these virgin births, resurrection, miracles, and all of that. Critics, they say that these cannot be proven historically, but Christians, the believer, they argue that this evidence exactly what set Jesus apart and explain his influence. So the questions becomes, do we only accept what is natural history, or do we leave room for possibility that sometimes something extraordinary happens? As historian N.T. Wright put it, the resurrection is the best explanation for why Jesus' followers didn't just scatter, but instead proclaim him as the Lord, even to the point of death. So then, the reality revealed. So was Jesus real? If we put faith aside and look at history, we can actually see most of these historians, Tacitus, Josephus, Maras, most of them they talk about Jesus. Even some atheists and some Christians, any source of Christianity point to this man that is real historically. But the question is not whether it's real or about his existence, but about his identity. Was he just a teacher, a prophet, or as his follower claim, as the Son of God? That is not a question history can answer. It's a question each of us have to wrestle with. So the reality of Jesus is more than an academic puzzle. It's a challenge, because if you look at his teachings, his words, you see that it's something that actually adds values to us, to human beings. Even if they are not Christian, there are some wise words that Jesus said that actually, if you read it, have value, like peace, making peace change a person's life. But the reality of Jesus is just more than an academic puzzle, because if you truly live, thought, and die as history shows, then the deeper questions remain. Who